Climate Change Summit adopts final document, calls for phasing down coal. The United Nations Climate Change Conference in Glasgow, Scotland, has adopted an outcome document which for the first time calls for cutting fossil fuels to tackle global climate change impacts. The document, known as the Glasgow Climate Pact, is an important document, but it is not enough, said UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres.
The approved texts are a compromise,
He said, reflecting the disappointment of many of the 197 governments and people attending the summit without getting concrete commitments for climate action.
They reflect the interests, the conditions, the contradictions, and the state of political will in the world today. They take important steps, but unfortunately, the collective political will was not enough to overcome some deep contradictions. As I said at the opening, we must accelerate action to keep the 1.5-degree goal alive. It's time to go into emergency mode, that we must end fossil fuel subsidies, phase out coal, put a price on carbon, and make good on $100 billion climate finance commitment to support developing countries. We did not achieve these goals at this conference, but we have some building blocks for progress,
he said. The document calls for phase-down use of coal rather than phasing out, which climate activists had demanded, and for phasing down inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. Turning to people who demonstrated to demand concrete climate action, to indigenous and women leaders and others who attended the summit, Guterres said,
I know many of you are disappointed. The path of progress is not always a straight line. Sometimes there are detours. Sometimes there are ditches. But I know we can get there. We are in the fight of our lives. Never give up. Never retreat. Keep pushing forward.
The outcome document expresses alarm and utmost concern that human activities have caused around 1.1 degrees Celsius of warming to date, that impacts are already being felt in every region, and that carbon budgets consistent with achieving the Paris Agreement temperature goal are now small and being rapidly depleted. The document reaffirms the 2015 Paris Agreement to hold the increase in the global average temperature to well below 2 degrees Celsius. It called on the 197 countries that signed the UN Convention on Climate Change to make stronger pledges to cut global warming emissions in this decade at the 27th Conference of Parties to be held at Egypt's Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh. It asks countries that failed to implement emission-cutting programs to renew efforts and calls on wealthy nations to at least double by 2025 the climate-related funds. The document does not fulfill all expectations, but the summit has produced some positive decisions. The United States and China, the world's biggest emitters, made a surprise announcement that they will jointly work to cut more carbon emissions this decade, while China said it will develop a first-time plan to reduce methane. More than 100 countries have agreed to cut methane emissions by 30% by the end of this decade. More than 100 countries, including the US, Brazil, China, and Russia, pledged to end deforestation by 2030.
With the latest news on the United Nations and the world, make sure to subscribe to this Facebook account by clicking the button above this video. See you next time.